Hey guys, welcome back to Emmalition. I'm Emma, this is Emmalition. I recently finally finished the Elden Ring DLC, so I thought I'd catch up on some VaatiVidya videos, and he's just released a new one called The Lore of Elden Ring is Divine. I think it's about the Horn Scent, and I'm really excited to watch it because I'll be honest, the Shadow of the Erdtree lore foxed me even more than the base game, so I'm looking forward to diving in with Vaati, finding out a bit more about the Horn Scent, and hopefully learning a bit more about the game we all know and love. So let's just dive in. Vaati, sing to me. I'm attempting 4K while uploading one of my own Dark Souls videos, so my full fiber is on its way, but I don't have it yet, so fingers crossed it streams okay.
Before Elden Ring's DLC was released, a data miner leaked to me that there was to be a stage codenamed Babel.
A data miner?
In the realm of Shadow. Now, obviously, Babel is a reference to the Tower of Babel from the Bible, and
obviously.
Anir Elim is clearly the tower in question. But why did From Software decide on this codename for the place?
I didn't know that.
Genesis 11:4. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city, with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth."
Cool.
This was the Tower of Babel, and the Babylonians that built it were prideful, a trait that tallies with the Horn Scent, who believed they were a chosen people. So they too built a tower, Anir Elim, a spiral that would pierce the heavens.
Wow.
But as it was in Genesis, the construction of such a tower would have dire consequences.
God, this is cool. I'm locked in. Okay.
The Tower of Shadow houses a divine gateway, a well-kept secret.
Can we just talk about quickly how you can't go through this gateway when you finish the game? Like, what the hell? Also, if that's a spoiler, why are you watching this without finishing the game? This whole video is a spoiler if you haven't finished it yet. You can't go through the gateway. That's like the biggest tease FromSoft have ever done, I think. It's really upset me.
But
whatever.
The gateway was once the birthplace of a god we know all too well.
Oh man, this is so cool. I love anything with biblical connotations because it's always so
Horns
grand.
are sublime artifacts to Horn Scent, and their presence confirms the belief that they are a chosen people. And tangled horns in particular are viewed as these irrefutable symbols of their primacy. The word primacy in this case is meant to convey that the Horn Scent considered themselves to be apex beings, the first and foremost, thanks to their horns.
I mean, yeah,
In
that
one
guy
item
was
description,
apex.
we're told that horns growing upon the body is a phenomenon born partially of devolution. And yet, to the Horn Scent, the appearance of horns was considered a signifier of the divine. So, how can both of these things be true? I think it comes down to the idea that the closer one gets to the moment of creation, which more often featured beings with horns and other aspects of the crucible, the closer one gets to divinity. If you believe, that is, that life was created in a divine act. In Elden Ring's divine creation myth, all life began as stardust, born of great rupture in the cosmos.
God.
You'll find differing opinions online regarding exactly how this breaks down, but as I understand it, all that there is came from the one great. Then the golden greater will of that one great fractured in what can only be described as a kind of Big Bang.
I'm going to need reminding why the crucible adjacent creatures with horns, like the omens and the misbegottens and stuff, ended up being shunned away. If they are something from divinity, I would have thought that would be a big thumbs up from Marika, because she's like obsessed with the outer gods. Or was it that I've forgotten some things. I'm hoping we'll get into it. I might need to go and rewatch some of the other stuff.
And life and souls were thus created.
They're so divine. Why does everyone hate them?
While the greater will clearly still exists on some level, its fracture is what eventually led to the melting pot of life known as the Crucible,
Cool.
the most primordial form of life on the earth. So it is that, in Ymir's words, we too are children of the greater will and its fracture. This interpretation of events handily explains why gold appears in the aspects of the Crucible. The Crucible ultimately came about from the golden greater will, and so gold infuses much of this primal life.
Okay,
Feathers, scales,
cool.
fangs, horns, these were evolutionary mutations that refined early life. Thus, there is something pure and divine about their occurrence, even if they are a byproduct of a more bygone wild age.
I really like that detail of having the deers with all the horns. Where did it go? Let me just run it back. The deers next to each other, where one of them have all of those tangled horns. I think that's such a nice detail. And it also,
there is something pure and divine about their occurrence.
There's the
even if
kind of what am I trying to say? Like the Crucible adjacent ones. I think that's really nice, and to me that shows something that reflects much society today as well. Is that the people with sort of like the human conscience hate each other for their ancestry and how they look, like again with the omens, whereas the animals can just cohabit peacefully because they realize they're all just deer and it doesn't matter. Elden Ring fixing race relations one step at a time. Love it.
Bygone wild age. Thus they are divine while also being aspects of devolution when they occur later. Another who came to appreciate the purity of the wild was a man known only as Red Bear.
I want to talk about him because
Bear
think his lore might help us to understand the Hornsent concept of wild divinity a little better.
Somehow, this man found himself in a life or death battle with a great red bear,
As you
a bout
do.
from which he emerged victorious. And afterwards, he became fascinated
Look
by
at that. Look at that. I simply want to become a bear. We've all been there.
untainted glory of the bear's naked strength. For he was a Redmane, a faction led by Radahn, who was in turn also captivated by the raw strength of Lord Godfrey.
I simply
and his
want to
beast
become a
regent,
lion.
Sarosh. Perhaps it was this that led to Red Bear's fascination with the untamed strength of the
I don't think we
wild.
met him.
And after his bout, Red Bear eventually forgot his own name. He wished instead to be a bear, no more and no less.
I get it.
There are two great
I get
red
it.
bears that we can fight in the DLC. One named Ralva and the other Rugalia.
Aw.
After defeating Ralva, you receive her pelt, which is just the thing to make a wild bear out of a warrior. And after
Ooh.
defeating Rugalia, you learn an incantation that allows you to channel the bear's power in an act that is jokingly called the Bear Communion.
Due to this spell looking like a dragon communion spell, and also requiring the subjugation of a wild beast.
But
Cool.
is
I
channeling
like that.
the roar of Rugalia actually similar to communion with the dragons?
The act of dragon communion specifically requires the consumption
This is the thing with FromSoft, is you don't know if them reusing animations is just through convenience or there's a deeper lore meaning to it. You
and
never know.
subjugation of a dragon's undying heart, after which the warrior will be able to channel their power for a time. In the end, though, as we've learned from Bale, the dragon will quite inevitably overpower their devourer, turning them into a magma worm. Or worse. Check out this video to learn more. The reason I'm explaining this is because the roar of Rugalia, despite looking like dragon communion on the surface, actually has a line that reveals it's more akin to the divine invocation of the Hornsent than it
Okay.
is to dragon.
Explain me that.
So,
Sir?
what is divine invocation? We'll go into this a little bit more in a moment, but basically, divine invocation is an art primarily used by the Hornsent, and it involves taming and calling divine entities into oneself. In this
Wow.
way, you make contact with the divine.
With both Dragon Communion and Divine Invocation, we have examples of beasts being subjugated, but I think there is a significant difference between the two. Simply put, I think the difference comes down to
hate these
intent.
guys.
Dragon Communion warriors subjugated the drakes in pursuit of their strength, but those who invoke the divine subjugate the wild in pursuit of the wildness within themselves. As the Roar of Rugalia puts it, only through desperate battle with the feral wild can one discover a god unique to oneself. And in this way, I think we see aspects of the feral wild, like Rugalia, becoming one with the user afterwards, if that makes sense. Luckily for the Hornsent, they could invoke the divine via their horns, which have a spiritual connection to the Crucible and thus a spiritual connection to wildness. But other humans, like Red Bear and the Tarnished, do manage to invoke it, but only by engaging in life or death battle with the wild instead. This brings us to the Highland Warriors and to Hoaraloo.
Whoa, there he is.
Lived side by side.
He's so scary.
According to their leather crown, the Highland Warriors are known to be hunters of bears. To them, there is no act more glorious than the subjugation of a savage beast.
Wow.
And among these warriors, there were some who wore the gloried attire, which included red patterned fabrics that were allowed only to those who hunted bears. These were the greatest and most glorious of the Highlanders. Interestingly, we also see a tassel of red hanging from the champion's pauldrons, which is armor from the base game that appears in a much later time that was similarly reserved for the Badlands' bravest. This armor would later be worn by the champions who followed Hoaraloo into the Badlands, and I'd like to propose that this red tassel might be a callback to the red that was once worn by the Highlanders. Highlanders like Hoaraloo.
It also looks like fur to me, like red hair, which could be off the red bears, which makes sense because if they're known for hunting bears, it's like a little trophy. But either way, just a thought. Elden Ring just really makes you root for the underdogs, doesn't it? Which I know is just a classic narrative, but man, I love all of the stuff that comes out of the Crucible. I just love it. I just think it's so interesting. It's just so cool.
There's
we need
very
to let
good
Vaati
evidence
talk,
to
but it's
suggest
so cool.
Hoaraloo was also a Highlander. For one, the Highlander's axe is looted directly beneath a portrait of Godfrey, and it reads,
that makes sense.
Brave combatants begin battle by crying out their names. Before the DLC, a piece of cut content revealed that the Highlanders were also called the Braves, and in line with that cut content, Hoaraloo does cry out his name before our bout with him, signalling that he was one of these brave Highlanders.
Oh, I completely believe that.
The Highland axe enhances roars, and Hoaraloo actually roars with bear SFX during his battle, suggesting that he too wrestled bears with the best of them, and might have even achieved a level of divine invocation.
Wow.
And as if this wasn't enough evidence, the warrior on the axe talisman wears the leather crown of a Highlander, and the axes of the Highlanders are also the signature weapon of Godfrey, who was Hoaraloo. So
I'm sold.
Hoaraloo was a Highlander.
We don't need any more evidence.
Clan, not unlike the Hornsent in this early age. And considering Godfrey went on to have 16 elite Crucible knights follow him,
did you guys ever beat them all? I didn't.
He really did carry a lot of influence.
I beat like 2.
This more wild, Crucible adjacent age.
I want the mod where I can fight with Hoaraloo.
Near Stormvale, this was also an age of wild winds. From the Divine Beast Dancing Lion descriptions, we've learned that whirling storms are an aspect of the heavens, and from one of Hoaraloo's own descendants, we can infer that the power of the winds was an aspect passed down through Hoaraloo's bloodline to Nefeliloo.
I will call upon the storm to drive away the foulness that has settled on the winds.
She's so cool.
And long ago, something called the True Storm raged. And it raged in Stormvale, which, incidentally, is also the place that Nefeliloo later lays claim to. So this perhaps suggests that she has a sort of birthright to the place via Hoaraloo's lineage. Here, long ago, the Stormhawks faithfully rendered lifelong service to the old king of Stormvale, who was the Stormhawk King.
I hate these enemies.
A hawk revered by all others as sovereign, back in the days when Stormvale's winds raged like no other.
But while this ancient monarch is proud and refuses to answer any of our summons, its ashes still have a use, as they can be given to Nepheli, reminding her of a time long ago.
Is that ash? I can smell the ancient storm in it. My thanks. I'll gladly take it. I'm not like Broderica. I don't feel the presence of spirits, let alone see them. Still, this ash, it reminds me of my first hawk. Thank you.
It's very noteworthy that Nepheli had her own hawk. I think it reveals that there was a measure of human companionship with the hawks back then. And more than that, I think it could help us to equate divine invocation of beasts with a sort of mutual respect with those subjugated, which makes it markedly different.
I love watching these videos because I have not finished every NPC quest line. I did not finish hers and never got those ashes, so I didn't give them to her. And I didn't know about any of that, so that's really interesting.
From Dragon Communion.
Thank
indeed.
you, Vaati.
While it's not clear whether Nepheli achieved divine invocation, one man clearly did with a hawk. This was a hornsent named Ornus. Specifically, it says that he tamed the divine
He's
bird
got a beak.
and made its wings his own as he soared through the sky. So, I just mentioned the importance of discovering a god unique to one's...
Have you noticed the swords that these guys have as well? The blades kind of look like tangled horns as well. That's really cool.
...self in divine invocation. Thus, I think it's significant that Ornus made the divine bird's wings his own. He tamed the divine bird, yes, but this was also his power, for a time, anyway. Then he finally fell to earth, and lived on as the guardian deity of the temple quarter. Saying Ornus lived on is certainly putting a positive spin on him falling to earth and dying, for it's here, on a hidden precipice overlooking the temple town ruins, that we find Ornus enshrined. But what Ornus achieved was quite the miracle. This is because, according to the Divine Bird warrior armor, the golden-hued divine birds are known to be cruel, never taking to human companionship. Those who invoked their divinity were few and far between. The mere mention that golden-hued divine birds never took to human companionship seems to suggest to me that there were other birds that did take to human companionship.
Like the normal hawks.
So, to return to Nepheli, I think it's more likely that she literally tamed a physical hawk who fought alongside her.
That's so cute. It's like a Pokemon.
Golden-hued divine birds were in a class of their own, and might not have even existed in the physical realm. Nonetheless, Ornus managed to invoke the divinity of such a being, and in doing so, he paved the way for many hornsent to come. For the divine bird warriors were the very first of all horned warriors, and all horned warriors were descended from Ornus. To invoke divinity as Ornus did, the horned warriors would utilize tangled horns as a medium, thanks to their connection with the crucible. With the horned warrior's greatsword, for instance, one can call a storm into the ornamental tangled horns, and then mow through enemies with that wind. This was called horn calling, and it was apparently the first step towards divine invocation. Among the horned warriors, some were chosen to become celebrated divine beast warriors, and these are the ones in-game adorned with a lion's pelt. And
I actually have only just noticed that these guys have the same like face/head as the dancing lion. I've only just noticed that.
Divine beast helm. Given their namesake, I suppose these were warriors who had managed to call a leonine beast into themselves. And among these, those who truly excelled at divine invocation were granted another rank, becoming sculpted keepers, who would be granted the honor of the lion dance.
Very
Presumably,
sick.
These are the two hornsent within who are possessed to pilot the construction.
O horn-decked beast from higher sphere delivered, take root inside the tower's sculpted keepers, and perched within, we beg of thee, rise.
So good. I think this is my favorite fight in the DLC, you know. hot take, not Mesmer, it's this one. Just because the music and the whole set design of it is so phenomenal.
Dance and cavort, cleanse all that thou wilt. Cruelty,
Got goosebumps, it's so good.
and those who plague the tower. Cleanse away the strumpet's vile progeny.
Strumpets is a fantastic word. Strumpets. Never even heard that
The word sculpted here is curious. I assume it's a reference to the stone body of the boss we fight, which is akin to a sculpture from the way it grinds when it moves.
Maybe it's just needs a big
As
stretch.
we've learned in the last video, stone was a fitting vessel for the spirit in ancient times, so that's what seems to be occurring here, with a so-called horn-decked beast being called into the sculpted keepers that are one with the vessel, possessed to channel this wrath delivered from a higher sphere. And make no mistake, the sacred beast from beyond, whatever it is wrathful, with a rage that mirrors the storm said to be in the heavens. During festivals at the tower, this is what they would watch, even should it take horn-sent lives. A crazed, cavorting lion dance that represented wildness.
Oh yeah, it's
and
called the
freedom.
Theatre of the Dancing
I
Lion,
see
isn't it?
thy purpose now.
Just remembered, sorry.
Wax wroth to thy heart's content, wild and free. And then, in exchange for this woman's life, release the sculptor keeper from thy rage. I ask thee at my last, O sacred beast.
Here, in the current age, in the distant future
Wow.
relative to all of the other events we've been discussing, defeating the dancing lion rewards you with the divine beast head,
Yes.
which, like the other horned headpieces, causes the blessing of the Erd tree to become nauseating, reducing the restorative effect of the flask of sacred tears.
I didn't know
Now,
that.
This is just speculation.
No way.
But I reason that this effect occurs because, to the horn-scent, the Erd tree would come to represent the polar opposite of their wildness.
Yeah.
It came to represent order. And there is a talisman
The Golden
that
Order.
I think suggests Lord Godfrey, who was Hoaraloo,
Marika's
also
oppression.
found the sap of the Erd tree nauseating. Yet, being the Gigachad that we know he is,
Gigachad.
he simply poised through it.
Hell yeah.
The talisman depicts Godfrey receiving the Erd tree sap, and as if the act of receiving it was difficult, the talisman reads, "The Lord accepted the sap
Stoically.
without any sign of wavering." No wonder Lord of the Erd tree casts a long
It's like his
shadow
duty to
over
do
the
so
lands.
because of his lineage, perhaps.
We previously established that Hoaraloo was present in the early times of the Horn-scent as a Highlander, and that his wrestling bears can be considered akin to channeling divinity on some level, but I reckon his connection to the Horn-scent is much more direct than most people think, and that's because of the horned warrior armor. This armor features ochre fabric draped over a chest piece, and it was made to resemble the unclothed form of a hero from older times. Without a doubt, I think, this unclothed hero was Hoaraloo, the brave warrior who famously shunned excess adornment. I'm not saying that
Famously
Hoaraloo
always had his
was
boobas out.
horn-scent. I mean, I guess we can't rule that out, since you don't exactly need horns to be horn-scent. Rather, a horn-scent is one because they practice horn-scent customs. But I just don't think there's much evidence of Hoaraloo practicing these customs.
He just lived
The
alongside them, I
Highlanders
think.
seem to me to be a similar clan, one adjacent to the Horn-scent.
Yeah, exactly.
Wrestling bears and engaging with the wild
these rune bears,
in a way
I hate
that also
them.
brought them close to achieving
It doesn't matter what
divine
level you are, they're still
unification,
scary.
but they didn't have the horns to pull it off. Horn-scent generally don't like other cultures. That's something we can infer from the Inquisitors that just took out other threats to their religion from within. But because of the proximity between the Horn-scent and the Highlander clan, theirs was clearly a clan that the Horn-scent respected, I think. To
Nice.
the point where
That was a
they
cool
would
shot.
one day dress their best warriors in ochre fabrics that were honorific of that Highland hero. So when Hoaraloo became Elden Lord Godfrey, as Marika ascended to godhood, it's logical to think that the Horn-scent might have initially approved.
But it's so interesting that Marika ended up with Godfrey, who was Horalu, and almost like tamed him, I guess, if he was this wild figure living alongside the Hornsent, slaying bears and living like wild and free with his boobas out all the time. And then she took him and kind of bestowed this order upon him. It's just interesting, I think, because that became something she hated.
Approved of this union, since
cool.
Horalu had been their hero. There is solid evidence that the Hornsent were aligned with Marika's rise as a god for a good while, so a lord alongside her leading 16 crucible knights and a golden beast on his back that echoes divine invocation should have been a good omen for the Hornsent clan.
Yeah, right?
Wrong. Horalu was a Highlander who valued strength above all else.
And he betrayed
he believed
his
a crown was warranted
clan
with strength alone, and it seems he saw power in the order of the Elden Ring and accepted it, even if it went against everything.
His wild nature. Wow,
so,
gosh.
Later,
Horalu.
as the Ode Tree's order became ever more distinct
What a
from
snake.
chaos, Godfrey received the sap of the Ode Tree, and in doing so, should have shown signs of wavering.
So he, is nauseated and sick by receiving this sap, but he pushes it all down in favor of the crown and the order, because to him that's the ultimate power rather than the wild strength of nature.
He did
Crazy.
Not. He would not waver.
Can't
as
trust
he neglected
anyone.
the horns growing on his omen children, nor would he waver as he pit his strength against the Stormlord. He and Marika had usurped the Hornsent's spiraling path to divinity.
Wow.
And their gate
Kinda
would
sad,
eventually
actually.
be closed. No
Isn't
wonder
it?
Lord of the Ode Tree casts a long shadow over the lands.
The shadow of the Ode Tree, you might
This
say.
video is sponsored by Path of Exile 2, an isometric dungeon crawling RPG,
Okay, good.
which I've really loved playing for the last few.
Thank you, Path to Exile 2, for sponsoring Vaati's video.
At the top of Anir Elim is a divine gateway.
You can't go
and
through it.
It's with this
Can't go
that
through it.
Marika ascended to godhood. But how? A scroll found in the Hornsent archives tells us a little bit about the rite that was involved. It reads, "A lord will usher in a god's return, and the lord's soul will require a vessel." So in the case of Marika, I guess one could argue that Sarosh was the lord, occupying the vessel that was Horalu in order to usher in Marika's return. Alternatively, you could argue that this rite only applies to Miquella's ascent, and that it didn't apply to Marika's, but maybe I should save this discussion for a different video.
Oh,
Instead,
no.
let
Carry
me
on.
establish here the nature of the tower itself, and how a divine gateway can even exist. Let's begin with a different line from the secret rite scroll, one that specifies that it's made of white tree bark. Many white trees can be found in and around Ballarat, and they are venerated by the Hornsent for good reason. The most important aspect of these trees is that they grow and intertwine in a spiral.
The form of these trees look exactly like those Hornsent that walk around the Abyssal Woods. I've forgotten what they're called, but they're stood the exact same. That's like their neck, and these are like the horns. That's really cool.
Which is this symbol of
Never noticed that
supreme
before.
importance in the world of Elden Ring, and of supreme importance to the Hornsent especially, who understand the spiral's significance. Incidentally, the Hornsent even appreciate two-headed turtles and their intertwined necks for this reason. The
Cute.
priests of the tower cast spiral incantations, and the last line of Spira tells us that the spiral is a normalized crucible current that, one day, will form a column that stretches to the gods. What this is saying, I think, is that the spiral is not just a symbol of the crucible, it kind of is the crucible. The spiral is a normalized crucible current, or put another way, it is this stabilized aspect that emerges from the crucible's chaos. This
I almost saw the word current as like in the sea, like a normalized crucible current that forms a column, like something that's taking us up. I feel like that's what that's trying to
almost
say.
sounds as if it's written from the perspective
A
of the
passage,
Hornsent.
almost.
And indeed, we know from the fine crucible feather talisman as well that they did have a word for the crucible as a tangible thing. The fact that they understood what it was helps to explain why they went so far as to build this enormous spiraling tower. They did it because the spiral is such a potent symbol for the crucible.
It's a current.
Earlier, we talked about how
Wow.
the crucible is tied to evolution, and how the spiral is the same shape as DNA, which is crucial to the process of mutation and evolution. A spiral is also made up of two entwined threads, which could
I'm seeing
explain
it like a
why so
whirlpool
much life in Elden Ring has
coming up
this
from the sea.
duality to it.
Can't get it out of my head now.
But how can a spiral form a column that stretches to the gods? Well, first, let's ask, what gods? The real answer is that we don't know for sure, but personally, I'm starting to suspect that the outer gods of the lands between are related to the Crucible. For one, both the Rot God and the Formless Mother are called twisted deities in the lore, which I feel is a play on words for the spiral, and it makes more sense to me that the outer gods might be these grounded, natural entities of the world. Rot, blood, death, the sun, these are natural concepts tied to the outer gods we know, and I find that easier to believe than the outer gods being these eldritch, cosmic beings, although they could certainly be both. Whatever the gods were, the Hornsent would reach for the heavens through their divine tower, and I mean that quite literally. Look at the symbol for spiral incantations, and at the top you'll
Oh,
note
it's hands.
two human hands grasping for new
That's
heights,
so awesome.
surrounded by the spiral. This is called a spiral tree design, and if you look at the bottom, you'll actually notice
like a
leaves
sword.
growing at the base. It's a symbol that's been printed upon amber, which is sap from a tree.
This looks like the hilt of a sword to me. And then, yeah, leaves, spiral, and hands. Oh,
And
so good.
I think the
So
way this
good.
description equates the White Tower with a spiral tree proves that the White Tower was built in the image of the white spiral trees of the land. Anir Elim was the Hornsent's man-made spiral tree. Spiral or no, trees in general appear to be special to the Hornsent, and I think what follows is a very relevant topic as it relates to Marika's Ode tree. So these are the golden trees of Anir Elim. They do not spiral, but they very clearly are spiritual objects with what look to be feminine figures growing out.
Oh
of
my
their
god, I've
bark.
never seen
It's
those.
almost like the trees have a remembrance of these folk. To understand why
So obvious
these
now.
bodies appear, let's look at the Euporia, a twin
Oh.
blade that symbolizes abundance, which was a secret treasure of the tower. Though the blades, fashioned from golden shoots, are largely wilted and darkened, their luster can be restored by dealing damage to foes. So here we have a weapon made from golden tree shoots, which grows stronger as it absorbs the life force of others.
That's awesome.
Perhaps this is what clued the Hornsent in to how to cultivate their abundant golden trees as well. It's the idea that life
Oh.
can be recycled.
Sorry, I just
That
completely
as it absorbs the
zoned
life
out, but
force
those are
of
the enemies I was talking about when I was referring to the trees. These ones, like,
cultivate.
I thought they were in the Abyssal Woods, but I think maybe they're here as well. But yeah, look, their heads and the way they're stood, like hunched over, look just like those trees. That's all I was trying to say.
Their abundant golden trees as well. It's the
They literally
idea
stood,
that
like,
life can
arced
be
over.
recycled to create abundance, which is obviously an idea Marika took to heart as well. So to come full circle, let's consider what is fertilizing the trees. I don't think this is sand. I think it's ash.
Ah,
Ash
that makes
from
sense.
cremated humans.
Oh, lovely.
We know for a fact that the Hornsent valued the ash of those who came before,
Spirit
infused as it is with potent spirituality. We collect this revered spirit ash in townships and villages as it quietly accumulates in the palms of the withered corpses known as tutelary deities. The tutelary deities are spread evenly around areas of Hornsent occupation, and they were guardians, spiritual protectors of the land, that were closer to divinity thanks to their tangled horns. In
Wow.
order to ascend from their mortal flesh to this state, it seems they would heighten their spirituality through severe ascetic training. And asceticism is basically when you forego indulgences of any kind, typically in favor of prayer or fasting. This evokes the imagery of real-life Buddhist ascetics who have famously perished in prayer, which is a reference we also see in Sekiro with the monks of Senpo Temple, and in Demon Souls with the Monumentals, who are themselves similar to these folk that appear at the entrance to Bellerat and by the sea.
What? I did not notice those. Oh my god. I've literally just been replaying Demon Souls just for fun, and just laughed at myself about how long it took me to find the Monumentals the first time round. And I can't believe I didn't see these, because that's such a direct callback, isn't it?
Sealing tree. As for the spirit ash these deities accumulate in their palms, well, it seems to come from beyond somehow. I can't find any direct evidence of local furnaces where Hornsent would have cremated their dead to create all of the ash in Anir Elim, but we do know that cremation was certainly practiced in this age. According to ghost flame sorceries, in the time when there was no Erd tree, death was burned in ghost flame.
Oh.
And the death birds were the keepers of that fire.
That's a quick way to cremate
Upper
someone, I
Bellerat
guess.
is bristling with
Breathe
grave
fire on
birds
them.
who were kindred to the death birds, so there's clearly a Hornsent connection to cremation here. Not to
God,
mention,
I would really like to explore Elden Ring death, like birth-death cycle in relation to like the psychopomp, because the way he was talking about those birds just made me think of like the psychopomp, because it feels like the deathrite birds and what were the birds he was just talking about, these ones, the grave birds, they just I feel like they symbolize that kind of spirit to take one from through life to death on that passage between, and I feel like there might be something in it, but I don't know what. I'll go away and think about it, and
so
I'll let you know.
There's clearly a Hornsent connection to cremation here.
It's just really
Not to
interesting.
mention, they have a talisman that boosts the power of spirit ashes. Also, Anir Elim has statues of boats that are ferrying the dead.
Oh.
And there's many examples of the dead being sent upon the river in Elden Ring, only to wash up on the shores of Charos.
This is exactly what I was talking about. Hold on. What I was trying to remember really badly was Charon, the psychopomp ferryman of the Greek underworld who carries the souls who've been given funeral rites across the rivers of Acheron and Styx, separating the worlds of the living and the dead. Sorry, I can't speak today. I haven't spoken to anyone before I started recording this video. It's the first time I spoke today. And that's all to do with... So archaeology confirms that in some burials, low-value coins known as Charon's obols were placed on or near the mouths of the deceased or next to the cremation urn containing their ashes. So it's all just making me think about the soul's journey in this way. And here's him on the boat. That's such a good photo. Here's him on the boat for his funeral. Charon on his boat in a funerary relief. And then there's all kinds of art about... the ferryman taking people from life to the afterlife. Now, I also can't help but notice the striking similarity between Charon in art history and the Tibia Mariners. Okay, I feel like I've unlocked something here and I don't know what, so I just need to let Vaati continue talking. But Caro's hidden grave sounds a lot like Charon. Yeah. Oh my god. Have I unlocked some lore? Or like some theme? Maybe he's going to talk about it. I don't know. But this is really exciting because I really like that whole side of Greek mythology. And one of my favorite Magic the Gathering YouTube channels, Rhystic Studies, did a really cool video all about the psychopomp in relation to one of my favorite commanders too, which I will link below because it's really interesting. And that's where I first discovered this whole part of mythology and this whole concept. So you should watch it if you like Vaati and you like magic, because It's very similar vibes, but also that's one of the things that got me into magic. So if you've ever been interested in Magic the Gathering and you like this lore stuff, you should check out that video because it's really good. I'll put a link somewhere. Anyway, this is cool.
Where the tainted flesh of the floating stone coffins was similarly burned by the deathbirds. So, to conclude, I do think there's good reason to believe that the Hornsent fertilized the trees of Anir Elim with ash, even if it was done for no other reason than to enhance the spirituality of the place. But there's a location where such potent burial practices were not observed, and here the consequences of such neglect is clear to see.
Yeah, rough.
At the Ailing village, a crude platform has been built at the precipice.
It's gross here.
It's from here that bodies must have been thrown, for we find a mountain of corpses down below, piling at the mouth of the Elak River. Here, some have survived the fall, metamorphosing into flymen, thanks to the dreaded fly sickness that certainly is what had them hurled from above.
The dreaded fly sickness.
The ailment talisman, looted at the platform, tells us more. A talisman depicting a soul taken by sickness. When the weak were infected with the dreaded fly sickness, they perished well before the metamorphosis could take hold. Oddly, those who cared for the infected and made certain that they were given a proper burial were never afflicted themselves. So, in accordance with the effect of the talisman, which boosts resistances to the ailment that you are in proximity
that's
of,
what they had.
Those who nursed the infected and gave them a proper burial did not contract the contagion, despite being in such physical contact with it. These surviving folk are the healers of the flymen villages, and they are indeed capable of casting spells that heal the flymen. They're also capable of boosting the flymen's damage and casting swarms of flies, which, to me, suggests a deeper allegiance to this caste of people.
They're not just nice nurses.
I've seen theories that these healers are the ones that caused the fly sickness, but considering they're actually capable of healing the flymen, I don't personally subscribe to that theory. Instead, I think this is a sickness stemming from the Japanese concept of kegare, which means uncleanliness or defilement, which is what occurred when the sick were hurled into the river instead of following the more typical and more hygienic.
It's very Valley of Defilement down there, isn't it?
The real curiosity to me is what entity is boosting the resistance of these healers who took care of the sick? Did the Mother of Truth protect them, since the healers do appear to use her magics, or did the outer god of death favor them, since she is mother to the deathbirds and their quote-unquote correct burial practices? It could even be the rot god that protects these healers, since man-fly flesh grows mold, and rot was a theme of the man-flies in
Pretty
Dark Souls
disgusting,
3
isn't it?
as well. We just don't know. As for why these corpses weren't burned, well, fire was notably prohibited in Marika's Age of the Erd Tree, so I wonder if that might have prevented the Hornsent from following a cultural practice of cremation. Marika did feed the Erd Tree's roots with corpses, but she notably did not cremate those corpses beforehand. That was a privilege that was saved for those who earned the hero's honor of Erd Tree burial, and it was these men and women who returned to the Erd Tree as spirit ash. Perhaps ash is just the superior fertilizer. It's certainly less confronting than corpses being kept at the base of a tree, which might explain why the corpses that feed the Erd Tree were kept underground in catacombs, or
because they're unsightly as fuck.
Jars.
Disgusting.
And speaking of jars, a common misconception that I've seen in my comments is that these jars at the minor Erd Trees are the same as the ones the Hornsent kept in their jails. But they're not. Erd Tree jars are for the bodies of the dead, for the bodies of fallen warriors, ideally, if Alexander's predilections are anything to go by. But Hornsent jars, on the other hand, were specifically for the interment of the living, and the shaman women within, they were the glue that held it all together. Literally.
Wow.
Let's talk about these shaman women. So, the word shaman is potentially overused in the English translation of Elden Ring, owing, I think, to a lack of synonymous words that could help differentiate the many different kinds of shaman in this game's lore, which is something that the Japanese translation does achieve. It does
really
differentiate between all these shaman quite well. For example, the Saishi shaman of Shifra River are very different from the blind Itako shaman that hail from the same village as Marika.
Yeah,
and
we just don't have enough words in the English language, do we?
These blind shaman are different again from the Kitoshi shaman mentioned in the Great Jar item description, which seems to refer to a third kind of shamanistic prayer expert who wear jars on their heads. These are distinct from the blind shaman of Marika interred in the very same jails, and in the English translation they're just all called shaman, which is a bit confusing.
It's quite reductive in English, isn't it?
It's the Itako shaman that hail from Marika's village that are relevant here in this video. In Japanese, Itako or Ichiko are blind women who have trained to become spiritual mediums in Japan. Through severe ascetic training, the woman is afterwards said to be able to communicate with the dead. And it's noteworthy that all these Itako are all women in real life as well. This feminine aspect to the shaman from Marika's village aligns with another description in the base game that describes the Newman that shared a race with Marika as being all women as well, suggesting perhaps that women were of special standing in this shaman culture. Incidentally, this might also explain why there appear to only be women emerging from the trees of Anir Elim. Perhaps these trees were only fed with the ashes of the shaman that were kept in jars.
It's all very feminine, isn't it?
Unlike how the minor Erd trees would be fed with the bodies from jars. Though, that's just speculation. And the shaman were fated for the jar. I actually think the symbol on their head is a...
I literally never in my wildest dreams would have noticed all of this detail with them being blind and having the cloth over them and the symbol on their heads, because they're so scary. The jump scares are so ridiculous in these jails. All I do is kill them as fast as possible. Again, why I love these videos, just so much time to pay attention to all these little details. It's awesome.
Something marking the shaman as a ritual object for the horn scent. According to a horn scent phantom at the whipping hut, that was their purpose. They were to be whipped until their flesh opened and ripened and then stuffed in pots with other folk so that they could all meld together.
Cool.
The flesh of shamans was said
fucking horrible.
to meld harmoniously with others, and according to the arrogant horn scent,
that's disgusting.
They were recorded for this alone. This horn scent phantom claims that nigh sainthood awaits the shaman within the jar, and while it is a horrific fate, they're kind of not wrong that there was something divine going on here.
No.
Their ritual was working for a reason.
I don't know.
Earlier, we discussed how the crucible was a melting
cruel.
pot of life, and no item
literally a melting pot, melting flesh in a pot.
Crucibles, aka the mother of all crucibles,
It's horrible.
which is a giant mass of intermingling crucible attributes. In a similar way to this talisman, the jarred shaman also become a giant mass of intermingling life.
Great.
And I think this explains why the horn scent would have so valued the malleable, meldable flesh of the shamans.
That's absolutely horrific.
They could merge with others so effectively.
Wow, the horn scents suck, huh?
As for whether the physical merging of life is divine,
Am I on America's side?
well, we kind of have proof that it
That's
is.
a joke.
The spiraling white tower
Or is it?
itself has masses of bodies hanging off it, and it culminates in a divine gateway that literally is a giant conglomeration of flesh. And most importantly, this approach has worked. Evoking the crucible in this way has formed a functioning connection with heaven, or the horn scent idea of heaven, at least. By the way, the shaman weren't the only thing in the jars. The jars also had horn scent within them, and these horn scent probably weren't the most important members of society. In fact, we have evidence to believe that the horn scent chosen to merge with the shaman
he's shaking.
were sinners. There's a phantom in a jail here that begs for mercy, saying that they'll never do it again, and swearing that they'll be a living saint. Just please don't turn them into a jarred one for their crimes. As for what they did with the jarred shaman that was melded together with others, well, it's kind of hard to say for sure. Did they use this flesh to build the divine gate? Did they use this flesh to fertilize the golden trees? Or did they hope that one shaman, one day, would actually achieve true sainthood? Was this the ritual that led to the rise of Marika and Radagon? Whatever the case, Marika would have her vengeance. Thus do we finally return to the end of the Genesis story about the people who built the Tower of Babel. Genesis 11:6-8. The Lord said, "If as one people, speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so that they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them from there all over the earth, and they stopped building the city. Verse 6 in particular has some parallels with Marika. After she had risen as a god, she recognized that the tower might potentially raise another divinity that could become a threat to her.
Yeah.
And so she eventually set about shrouding the tower and scattering the horn scent. In the Bible, the Lord does this by confusing the language of the Babylonians, and I feel like this obfuscation of language might also be paralleled in the DLC with the Secret Rite Scroll and its fidgety little letters, as Freya calls them. The Sacred Rite of the Tower has become difficult to decipher in recent years, adding an extra layer of difficulty for those who wish to access this horrific Gate of Divinity for their own ends.
That's just a classic form of control, right? In any religion or government, is just total dispersal of communities and threat to communities and breaking them down in any way. Barriers. That's what ultimately ends up creating power when you draw these imaginary lines and you stop people coming together and moving freely, and that's exactly what Marika did. She's crazy.
I think that the horn scent might have foreseen that this process might raise a vengeful god or vengeful saints.
Ugh, so gross.
I suppose that was their sheer arrogance on display, wasn't it? Their stance was that the shaman should be thankful for their nigh sainthood within the jar, and if a horn scent potentate should feel doubt or impurity while stuffing pots with all manner of things, well, there were ritual implements they could wear to ward away such emotions so that their divine ritual could proceed.
Oh, wow.
And if vengeful
Torture
spirits
masks,
did emerge from this process, well, that's nothing new for the horn scent. These could simply be twisted to their purposes as well. The bone bow, for example, is a product of the ancient hexing arts of the tower, and it imbues its arrows with vengeful spirits that naturally seek out living targets. The horned bairn, too, makes use of the vengeful spirits. Spirits of the young who died bearing overly tangled horns, who are memorialized by these fetishes. It seems the horn scent learned a lot from the deathbirds and their hexes. On the flip side, guardian spirits were utilized as well as vengeful ones, and these guardian spirits watched over the caster that they were endeared to, protecting them from harm. This is a spell cast by the Horn-Scent Grandam, who, with her tangled horns, appears to have once been an accomplished, very high-ranking member of Horn-Scent society. Indeed, she has dialogue where she shows this authority she has over others.
None of the tower would dare interfere, and if one should, I'll see to them myself.
At release, this character was called the Empyrean Grandam, but this was quickly patched, making it clear that the word Empyrean was an inappropriate title for the Grandam, as far as the lore was concerned. But why was it changed? So, the word Empyrean in Elden Ring typically refers to those chosen by the Two Fingers as candidates to become the vessel for the Elden Ring, even if that means succeeding Queen Marika as a god. Thus, the title Empyrean Grandam was commonly interpreted as meaning the Grandam was an Empyrean candidate for godhood, but I don't think that can be true. For one, the two fingers barely show up in Hornsent lore at all, so I think the word Empyrean in her title was probably just used here to simply convey that the Grandam with her tangled horns was divine.
Horns in her eyes is
Zuli the
tough,
Witch recently revealed that all Hornsent are codenamed Empyrean in the files.
Oh,
and I think that's because
cool
thanks to
finds,
their horns,
Lily.
they are considered heavenly Empyrean beings. That's the literal definition of the word Empyrean. And I reckon it was changed because they realized people would classify this character as an Empyrean that was like Rani or Mikola or Melania,
but they're different.
or Marika, which she wasn't.
Again, we need the nuance.
Those are Empyreans capable of claiming the divinity of the Elden Ring, but in my opinion, there's not much evidence that the Hornsent were seeking the divinity of the Elden Ring at all.
No.
To argue for that last point, I'm going to try
This
and
boss
argue
fight,
that
so good.
the Divine Gate accesses a power that is separate to the Elden Ring, and that it is a power that precedes the Elden Ring, if anything.
Okay.
As Mikola journeys through the realm of shadow, he divests himself of his strength, and his great rune of the Elden Ring as well. His power of enchantment is thus broken. And yet, when he returns from beyond the Divine Gateway in divine aspect, he commands that power once more, with a new power to spark a new age centered on his circlet of light. And this is all without the Elden Ring. Just so, it follows that Marika could also have drawn power from the gate in a similar way. In the trailer, she holds threads of light up to the Divine Gate, the same threads that appear when she later shatters the Elden Ring. So maybe she's weaving her order of the Elden Ring into being here, using the divine energies of the gate. It's clear that the Elden Ring represents a type of order for the world. It's a blueprint for life, with its runes that infuse nearly everything. And the Erd Tree, which has the Elden Ring as its source, only came to represent Marika and her order after her ascent as a god, so you'd think she must have needed the Divine Gate for something. I think she needed it to access the divine energies of the Crucible, for according to the Gilded Great Shield, the Crucible's primordial matter became the Erd Tree, and I think that's what we're seeing happen here. One counterpoint to this theory is that Placidusax, who was Elden Lord in an age before Marika, would not have had access to this divine gate, and yet their Elden Ring still commanded an age. But that doesn't mean that Placidusax and his god didn't have a divine gateway of their own.
There's more spirals of the storms, the current taking things up to the heavens. Are you paying attention?
Tapping into these crucible energies that apparently are important for gods to command an age. Farum Azula features interred remains all throughout its structures, and we've established that having conglomeration of sacrificed flesh can lead to the construction of a divine gateway. There are beastmen in the Farum Azula pillars, there are dragons in its earth, and Placidusax's mausoleum especially evokes the idea of a divine gateway.
It's really
a sacred place built with corpses within a spiraling storm by an elden lord with spiraling necks and a race of dragons that definitely evoke
his neck is like the helix again
in more ways than one. But as we know, Placidusax's god, who was assumedly the vessel of the Elden Ring, would flee, hinting at an event that could have led to the Elden Ring passing into human hands via the fingers.
Not the fingers.
Did have a hand in the dragon's age.
So gross.
And who did play a part in the birth of the Erd Tree to come as well. This is getting a little off topic, and I'll admit there's more speculation here than I'd like, so I will revisit these theories in future videos, especially if you guys have feedback for them in the comments.
Yes, please.
I want this to make sense as much as possible. But to recap, I believe that divine gates are a pure incarnation of the Crucible and its energies. I believe the dragons might have tapped into these energies with their ancient Elden Ring. I think Marika inherited that Elden Ring and similarly used a divine gateway to channel the energies that became the Erd Tree, and I think Miquella later tapped into these same crucible energies to start his own age without the Elden Ring.
Yeah, I could see that.
To be clear, again, this is just one of many ways this whole topic could be interpreted, but that's how I interpret it for now. As for what lies beyond the Divine Gateway,
that's what I'm interested in.
That's a fascinating question, and I have some ideas, but perhaps they're better suited for upcoming videos on Marika or Miquella, both of whom are the only characters we know of who might have encountered what lies beyond. Though, I think there is one other who saw the heart of the Crucible, a Hornsent who beheld the truth, only to see it and weep endlessly.
Oh no. Hornsent Lament. I don't know if I'm convinced by that Divine Gateway, you know. I think I need more on that.
To the Hornsent, horns are a medium for invoking divinity. They're a symbol of spirituality, a sign of prestige, and more. These things all sound very positive, but consider the Lamenter, who is covered in a severe tangling of horns, and yet his face is twisted into an expression of rapturous grief. Tangled horns are caused by horns growing out from other horns at random angles. This is physiologically a very dangerous thing, and indeed most young, bearing the oversized horns, meet a frightfully early demise.
That's so sad,
Those
isn't it?
that survive often have the inherent spirituality to become divine beings, like the tutelary deities. But there's something that sets apart the Lamenter, even from them. It's that the Lamenter's horns have tangled towards his own eyes, which they pierce deeply. This is something that also occurred with Mohg, whose tangled horns have led him to being blind in one eye. And there's a trend with blindness that I've been noticing recently. The trend is that blindness appears to be a catalyst for a different kind of sight, one that allows the blind to see a higher truth. According to some historians in real life, blindness has long been associated with spiritual powers in Japan, and Elden Ring has this theme all throughout.
Yeah.
The scholars of Raya Lucaria, for example, did not see with their own eyes, and often went mad from seeing the truth in the cosmos. And then there's all the blind who would have made contact with the outer entities, like the Thorn Sorcerers, who discovered the Bloodstar in their eternal darkness. Hayata saw frenzy that couldn't be seen with the naked eye, and Mohg made contact with the Formless Mother. Now, I've seen some theories online that claim the Lamenter is similarly blessed by a bunch of outer gods, so let's go over those theories and see how valid they are, starting with the least valid.
I can't help but notice, again, this might relate to some real life religious beliefs and concepts, I'm not sure, but everything that I would deem horrendous in like Elden Ring is posed as like a blessing or like an honor, like having literal horns growing out of you back into your eyes, or like being stuffed into a jar filled with other people is considered like you should be super grateful for that. And it's just interesting, isn't it? Like the pain and oppression is posed as like a religious honor and a spiritual honor. Again, feels like a manner of control, or like just the world's biggest cope. Just the world's biggest cope ever.
My opinion. Some say the Lamenter wields black flame, making them tied to destined death or an outer god of death, but I disagree with that one. The darkness the Lamenter wields is actually not black flame, but rather it's a more literal darkness effect that was introduced in the DLC, and we also see it being cast by the Curse Blades. The Curse Blades, like the Lamenter, were imprisoned in a devastatingly dark jail, so I'd argue that their proficiency in these dark arts came about from that imprisonment,
the worst
rather
enemies.
than anything else. Next, some say the Lamenter is inhabited by the fell god of flame, citing its tufts of red hair and the face growing out of its back.
I was going to say, I
And
noticed the face.
I think this theory has a bit more heft to it, although you can argue against it just as well. Yes, the fire giants do have a face growing on them, like the Lamenter,
And red
but
hair.
theirs is one-eyed, and the Fell God is famously depicted as a one-eyed god, though you can counter that counter-argument with the fact that the visage of the Fell God depicted by the Furnace Golem does have two eyes. So I think it's hard to argue whether the Fell God is one-eyed or if that's just the way the fire giants experienced it. As for the Lamenter's red hair, it could be tied to the Fell God, since the fire giants had red hair, but you could also argue that the Lamenter's red hair is a sign of its connection to the Crucible instead. Many connected to the Crucible
the Misbegottens.
sport red hair, like the Leonine Misbegotten or the giant red bears, and one could also argue that Radigan resented his red hair for this reason. So I'm hesitant to say
I could see
the
that
Lamenter's
actually.
red hair definitely connects it to the Fell God. But my favorite idea for the Lamenter places it as adjacent to the outer god of frenzy, who is represented by those themes of orange flame and notably of lament. It's pretty subtle, but there's actually an orange hue emitted by the eyes of the lamenting visage, in its icon at least.
Yeah.
That said, it doesn't cause frenzy, so I don't think the Lamenter is aligned with the outer god of frenzy per se. Rather, I think the Lamenter simply has some overlap with frenzy and its grief, while also being equal parts rapturous and blissful as well. So, to start, let's go over the most important paragraph of lore that is related to this creature, and it's from the Lamenter's Mask. It reads, "This transformation tallies with the state of a denizen of paradise, but the people of the tower denied and hid it from the world. In their foolishness, they viewed true bliss with deep fear."
Ooh, okay.
Earlier, we established that the Lamenter's lack of sight is paradoxically a theme of enlightenment that is common to other blind characters in the game. Thus, I think it's fair to consider the Lamenter an enlightened character, experiencing a state of bliss as a result. And I think this enlightenment is also why the Lamenter's state of true bliss is one that should have been studied by the Hornsent, not shunned. It was, after all, the goal of Hornsent ascetics to ascend to a higher state of divinity, and the Lamenter's transformation tallies with the state of a denizen of paradise, of heaven. And yet, in the case of the Lamenter, the people of the tower denied and hid it from the world. Why?
Weird. Why would they do
Because
that?
the Lamenter terrified them.
Gonna say,
Imagine
it's
you
fear
cultivate
again.
This enlightened being with intensely tangled horns,
And then
representing
shot it
this
away.
paragon of divinity on earth.
Disgraceful.
And what does it do? It laments unstoppably. And the lore says that they were terrified of its condition, specifically its state of true bliss and rapturous grief. That's why they hid it away. We know the Hornsent were prideful to a fault, so of course they denied the Lamenter's true bliss. To accept it would be to accept that the path to divinity could lead to this pathetic, mournful creature, and so they sectioned off the Lamenter.
We don't want to be
from the
divine if we're
world
going to end
and
up that
entombed
pathetic.
in darkness.
No, thank you.
This is very similar to what the Hornsent did with Midra, whose lore you can
Yes.
find fully explained in this video.
So cool.
In that video, I talk at length about the Inquisitors, aged, powerful torturers who were tasked with basically stifling any threats to the Hornsent that would have arisen from within their own culture. These were some of the highest ranked members of Hornsent society. Indeed, they were the ones who would receive golden horn tenders, spiral horns coated with gold that were greater even than the silver horn tenders, which were themselves symbolic of society's upper echelons. I suspect the Inquisitors would have been involved with the Lamenter's imprisonment as well, for the Lamenter held a truth
bad for
that
these
was
Lamenters.
dangerous to the religious core of Hornsent society. But they should have accepted it. The lore says that in their foolishness, the Hornsent viewed true bliss with deep fear, which logically means that it would have been the opposite of foolishness to accept it. It would have been wise to
Yeah.
accept it. But what did the
They fucked up.
Lamenter see? What did they experience? Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Personally, I think the
They're
Horned
seeing the
Lamenter
truth.
beheld the truth behind the crucible. I believe that it realized that life is ultimately an awful crucible of competition,
Yes.
with all of the suffering and power and struggle and evolution.
God, I've got
that
goosebumps.
entails. But what it saw can't be all
Oh my
bad,
God.
right? The Lamenter is weeping, yes, but it's also paradoxically in a state of rapturous true bliss. It's happy.
How
on
could you
some
not
level,
be when you
not
finally have
unlike
the truth?
So-called evil spirits that the Omen saw, perhaps, which were also smiling. The lamenting visage also has an unusual expression that somehow imparts a sense of contentment. It is the languid ease of one who needs not sight. To those who seek happiness, blindness is bliss.
Wow.
There's probably a few ways to interpret this, but I personally interpret it to mean that the horrifying truth of the world can be safely ignored. Indeed, Miquella does
Ignorance
return
is
from
bliss.
the divine gate with his eyes wide shut, and we never see Marika's eyes either. The Lamenter thus offers salvation. But the Hornsent could not accept or would not accept. So, circling back to the idea that the Lamenter is adjacent to the outer god of frenzy, I have one last theory, and it's
Okay.
that many outer gods, Rot, the mother of truth, death, they all erupt after being suppressed, but can flourish when
They
they're
bloom.
being accepted, as we've seen with the Rot in the DLC. We talked about this at length in the previous video on Raw, and how that was a balanced society which accepted outer gods.
Did I watch that one yet? I can't remember.
So,
There's too many.
what if this is the Lamenter simply accepting the terrible truths related to frenzy? The Lamenter could therefore represent the idea that lamentation is healthy, but suppression of those who saw the truth, like Midra, is not. I don't know for sure. This is my interpretation of this
Yeah.
character.
I feel
But I think,
I'm on
what
board
From
with this.
Software are really trying to say is, you should watch my Prepare to Cry series. Let it all out.
Yes, we should. I was gonna say, it feels like what they're trying to say is like turning a blind eye to the truth is ultimately what causes the downfall and creates this false god, and that the ones who open their eyes to the truth, or the ones that accept it and see it, are the ones who truly reach bliss and divinity. But the truth is too painful and no one wants to face it, so therefore those who get close to that level of divinity just get shut away and shunned and tortured. That's crazy. That's crazy. Damn.
After Marika's ascent at the Gate of Divinity, there's evidence that the Hornsent accepted her and the Elden Ring. For one, there are multiple Hornsent references to Marika's purge as a betrayal, and for the Hornsent to consider her actions a betrayal, she must have been aligned with them in the first place. Though, as additional evidence of her rule reaching the Hornsent, the rune arcs of the Elden Ring are enshrined in Anir Elim. Stakes of Marika are found throughout Midra's Manse, which was cut off from the rest of the Realm of Shadow early on. The Great Sword of Damnation references her golden order, and the dueling shield makes it clear that ritual combat to honor the Erd Tree was a cultural practice of the Realm of Shadow. What's more,
Okay.
there's evidence that Messmer's crusade did
such a
not
cool
happen
area.
immediately after Marika's ascent to power. In fact, there's evidence it happened much later. As per a conversation I had recently with Dave Control, another lore creator, we know this because A. R'hllana, sister of Rennala, joined Messmer's crusade with Rennala's blessing, meaning Rennala must have been aligned with Radagon at the time, and B. Messmer knows what a Tarnished is, meaning his crusade likely happened after Godfrey became Tarnished. But slowly, as order was established, the Crucible would be looked back upon with scorn for its close resemblance to chaos. This paradigm shift would have helped to justify the veil being put up over the Realm of Shadow, and it would have helped to justify the Hornsent being crucified.
Ugh.
I think this might have also been the moment when the shadow of the Aude tree came into being. We learn from the remembrance of the shadow sunflower that the Shadu tree is born of dark notions that bear no sense of order, that twist and bend its stock, rendering it brittle. And there's that word twist again. A second stalk winds tightly around the first, almost as if in a tender embrace. The Shadu tree itself is a spiral, so it makes sense that it evokes the crucible, which also seems to bear no sense of order. I think it's the shadow of the Aude tree that was left behind as the Purge began. We'll go over the events of the Purge in more detail in the next lore video, which will likely be on Messmer, so please subscribe for that. But let me briefly sum up the Purge here, as it relates to the Hornsent, at least. For the Hornsent fought back, with the sculpted keepers especially, who were able to put the violent ritual of the lion dance towards martial ends. However, most keepers were gored, hung and burned upon Messmer's spears, and those who witnessed the deed likened it to a funeral pyre for the tower itself.
Oh, wow.
The Curseblades fought in this war as well, wielding the Hornsent's signature backhand blades to fend off the invaders. They were a scourge that failed to become tutelary deities, and they were largely imprisoned by the Hornsent, so many must have been released when the invasion began, because they also became a scourge for those who invaded the Hornsent homeland. Despite their efforts, we get the impression the Purge was very one-sided. Though, once conquered, the Hornsent weren't entirely wiped out. They were permitted to remain in their ruined cities. Many were sealed away safely in shadow, and records of their culture were even archived in a specimen storehouse, with Hornsent themselves maintaining the records. At some point, it seems
dark, isn't it?
Messmer's army no longer had the will to carry out the rest of the crusade. Or maybe
just gave
they
up.
Simply didn't have a reason to.
Well, yeah,
Indeed,
they've
I think it
overthrown
rather
them.
plain to see
Why would they need to?
things once broken can never be the same.
This is our nameless Hornsent, refusing to wax nostalgic about days gone by after being handed a scorpion stew, which is a potent reminder of his past.
I almost feel like Messmer's Crusaders not finishing the job, as it were, and just leaving some of them imprisoned and leaving some history to archive and leaving some of them to march around their settlements is like that thing of sort of leaving survivors to tell the story and to sort of live in fear is like another form of oppression. Like, why would they wipe them all out when they could leave some of them to tell the legacy of what Messmer did and to ensure they are kept living in fear? I guess it would prevent a future rebellion by leaving people cowering and afraid,
Like
I would imagine.
His people persist, and yet they're lost.
If Miquella's redemption soothes the ache that throbs within, demanding blessed vengeance, then I wish not to be by him redeemed.
Hornsent's fate is to lose himself to the cycle of vengeance, even after it is achieved.
He John Wicked
This is why Miquella wished to die for the sins of the past and be reborn, and Hornsent shows us why Miquella's charms are necessary if an age of compassion is to be achieved. Thank you for watching. In case you missed the ad read,
Vaati, that one genuinely blew my mind, like in so many ways. I can't I'm sure this isn't the first time that Vaati's got like or drawn overtly biblical references to Elden Ring, but it's been really interesting to read those passages from Genesis and to learn about the Tower of Babel, was it, and draw so many real life historic references. What I find so interesting about all of this is like every time I watch or learn or read something else about the Hornsent and the Crucible and the Crusade and Marika, I seem to flip-flop between liking the Hornsent and not. All of that really disgusting stuff they did with the jars, I just can't fully get my head around that. But then the way they were sort of wiped out by Marika is just really depressing, and you can't help but feel bad for them, especially when Hanson, such a cool character, such a cool NPC. That was a lot to take in. I don't know what to make of it. The only thing I'm struggling with is the Divine Gateway. I don't really know what to make of that. I feel like I still don't fully understand maybe what it is or where it goes or how it was made. And I know he did try to get into that and pose his own theories, but it's just not making sense to me. And I think the overall look of it isn't making sense either, because the Erd tree and the shadow tree and loads of the horns, they're all kind of similar shapes. Like, I feel like Elden Ring is very visual and draws on a lot of symbols to convey meaning, and I'm not getting that from the Divine Gateway. It doesn't look like anything else, and that's what's bothering me, I think. Obviously all the bodies, I guess, make sense with the way they're piled up around the world to like feed the trees. That makes sense to me, but what is this feeding? Is it feeding the heavens? Is it feeding the gateway? I don't know. That's baffled me, but I really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed learning more about these jars of women. Sounds really weird out of context. Really interested to explore that psychopomp element that I mentioned earlier. I don't know what to really make of that, but I'm going to maybe look into that in my own time, because I think that's awesome, and definitely a strong piece of like mythology to draw on, that it wouldn't surprise me if it has been drawn on by From Software here, and their in-house mythologists. That was awesome. I loved it. I love Vaati. Obviously go subscribe, support him, subscribe to his Patreon, etc. And I can't wait for more, to be honest. And Elden Ring Night Reign's out soon, so I don't know what the hell lore implications that's going to have. If we've got like Dark Souls bosses in Elden Ring, I don't know if it's just going to be a hootenanny of fun, or if it's going to have actual real world lore implications, but it could be crazy. So I'm really looking forward to playing it. I got through to the network test, so I'm super happy. So we'll be playing that in a few weeks. But yeah, I'm playing Dark Souls 3 for the first time right now. If you want to come watch, and if you don't, that's fine. And I'll see you very soon for more stuff.